Hello and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here then welcome. Today I will be doing the romance reader book tag. I wanted to do a romance themed video for Valentine's Day. I thought about doing like a romance book recommendations video, but I wanted to add a little bit of flair to my recommendations, so I looked up romance book related book tags just so I have questions to go along with my recommendations, and I came across the romance reader book tag, and the theme of this tag is to answer questions based on who you are as a romance reader and your journey throughout reading romance books. So I thought that made for a very interesting tag, so I'm going to do it today in celebration for Valentine's Day. And I guess we have a friend who will be joining us, huh? So hopefully he's not too distracting, but he's cute, so I'm gonna leave him there. So I did want to do this video for Valentine's Day. However, I will be putting this up probably on the 15th. I'll try to get it out today as I'm filming on Valentine's Day, but most likely it'll be coming out today, if that's what today is, the 15th. I did already film this video last night, but my makeup was messed up and the lighting was terrible, so I'm going to have to refilm it. So that's why I might not be getting this video out exactly on Valentine's Day, so that is disappointing, but it's still the week of Valentine's, so it still counts. And also because I already filmed this video and I really just want to make this refilming process as easy as possible, I'm filming with my phone today so I don't have to fiddle with my DSLR that I sometimes struggle to even make it focus, so I just don't want to go through the hassle today. We're just going to film on my phone and make it easier. So I applied all these questions to both young adult books and adult romance books, since I feel like my journey with both young adult and adult romance are two completely separate journeys, because I think that young adult and adult romance are two completely separate genres, so I kind of wanted to share my journeys with both. Anywho, let's just get started and get right into the questions. So question number one is about how old were you when you started reading romance, and do you remember the first romance you ever read? So in terms of my first young adult romance that I ever read, that has to go to Twilight. This was also pretty much one of the first real novels I ever read. That wasn't a middle grade novel that I read when I was a kid. This was like the first real novel that I ever read, and my first young adult novel that I ever read. And of course, like with many others, Twilight is very sentimental to me because of that. It really is one of the books that got me into reading, and it definitely was the first ever romance I ever read. Is the romance in this series one that should be replicated in real life? No. Is it a little toxic? Yes, but it still was a great romance to me when I first read it. I still loved Edward and Bella, and I also absolutely loved Bella and Jacob. I think I love Bella and Jacob more than Edward and Bella. I for sure have always been Team Jacob. I love him so much. I feel like he has a lot more personality than Edward does, so I was definitely on Team Bella and Jacob. But both sides of the love triangle are so good. And I was 13 years old when I first read Twilight. So I was 13 years old when I read my first young adult romance. And as for my first adult romance, which I was 19 years old when I read my first adult one, the first adult romance book I ever read is Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. Right after I read this book, it completely changed the game when it came to romance books, because this was the first adult romance book I ever read, and it was a completely new shift from young adult romance because this book has so much spice in it. I did not know that it was even legal to traditionally publish a book with this much spice in it. Like, I was blown away. I'm like, how is this a thing? But apparently I found out that there are so many books out there with spice in it, and I just had no idea. And so this was my gateway book into the spicy romance genre, and I loved this book so freaking much. And it's really funny because as I was looking through my Goodreads reading history and the timeline of when I read all my books, I didn't pick up another adult romance book for another like 2 years after reading this one, which is crazy because I really fell in love with the adult romance genre just from this book. But it took me a while to get into actively reading adult romance, I was still very much into young adult romance, but 2 years later, I started reading a lot more adult romance and I never looked back. So yeah, I was 19 years old when I first got into adult romance, and I was pretty much the target audience when I first started reading adult romance. So that is good because minors really should not be reading adult romance books, at least the spicy ones. So I'm glad I read this one at a time when it was okay for me to do so. Question number 2 is, did you deliberately seek out romance or did you stumble upon it, and how? So I have really always been reading romance books. I can't even remember a time where my journey started with reading romance books. In the beginning of my reading journey, I would at least pick out books that at least had a romance subplot. Like, it didn't have to fall into the category of like a romance book, but I always needed it to have a romance subplot. So romance has always been something that I really love to have in my books. It's very rare that I pick out a book that doesn't have a romance in it. Like I said, I had always been reading young adult romance books, but I do remember when my journey with reading adult romance books started, and I really only found out about adult romance book while watching booktube videos. And there's this one creator who I have mentioned before. I think I mentioned her in my last book tag. That is Peace Love Books, and her channel is specifically about recommending romance books. So I had gotten so many adult romance recommendations from her, and still to this current day, I seek out her videos when I am looking for adult romance book recommendations. So she really introduced me into the world of adult romance. And my adult romance journey really started probably when I was about 21. That's when I started to pick up so many adult romance books. Question number 3 is, did you start with traditionally published or indie, and has it switched? So I definitely started reading traditionally published books because in general, when I was first getting into reading, I really only read what was mainstream, and what was mainstream was always traditionally published book. Throughout the years, I have occasionally picked up an indie published book, but I would really love to work on picking up more indie published books because I don't read enough indie, and that needs to change because I would love to get more indie published authors a chance. I do have Kindle Unlimited right now, and I know a lot of indie authors put their work on Kindle Unlimited, so I have easy access to indie published books. So I don't know why I don't read more of them. It's just something I have to work on this year. It is a goal of mine. Question number 4 is, what was a romance trope you were afraid to try but ended up loving? I had a hard time answering this question because I really only stick to the tropes that I know I love. I don't venture out a whole lot. I know which tropes I don't like, so I just really never read books with those tropes because I want to read books with tropes that I like, as I'm sure everyone does. So I don't experiment a lot. Eventually, I did come up with an answer to this question, and that is mafia romance. So the reason I have been apprehensive to this trope for a while is because a few years back, I read Den of Vipers by K.A. Knight, and I really was not a big fan of this book, and specifically the mafia romance aspect of it, also because it was way too spicy. Like, even for me, it was just too much spice. So there was a whole skew of reasons why I did not love that one, and I just was not really into the mafia aspect of it. So for a while, I didn't pick up a mafia romance book until recently, and I didn't even know that this book had a mafia aspect to it, and that is Lights Out by Nevessa Allen, which I have talked about a whole ton recently, and I'm going to talk about this book a lot in this tag as well. This is my first mention of it, but this book turned into a mafia romance at the end, and I was really digging the way this book took a turn with the mafia romance trope. It was really good, and it made me think, you know what, I'd be down to pick up more books with the mafia romance trope in it in the future. And I know there's so many books that have that trope in it that I can choose from, so I'm gonna give more mafia romances a try. I think it's something that I could get into. Me literally making sure that my makeup is not messed up because I'm so nervous that it's gonna get messed up. again, and I'd have to refilm this a third time. I'm just making sure my eyeliner has not transferred. I think we're looking good. I hope so. Question number 5 is there a romance book you read early on in your journey that you would rate differently today? Which is a really good question. So for this, I'm going to answer with Don't Kiss the Bride. I believe this is by Carrie Ann Cole, I'm going to say. I initially rated this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it, but there was one part about it that kind of bothered me. So to get into the synopsis or the basic premise of this book, it deals with an age gap romance where the heroine is a lot younger than the hero. I believe the heroine is like freshly 18 and the hero is in his 30s, so it's a huge age gap romance. And I had a problem with the way that the hero's parents reacted to him dating like a literal teenager. Like, she's 18 but she's like a fresh adult, and they just were really like chill about it, and I found that to be really odd. Like, as a parent, I would be like, what the heck are you doing? Like, are you sure you want to do this? And they were just like, oh, this is fine. And that kind of bothered me, but I don't think it was enough of a criticism to warrant a 4-star because I loved everything else about this book so much. I only knocked it down a full star because of the parents' reaction, and it was just a very minuscule criticism about this book that I feel like it should have been 5 stars. So I'm curious about what I would think about this book if I were to read it today, and I do plan to reread this book sometime. So when I do reread this book, I'll be curious to see if I do knock it up to a 5-star. Question number 6 is, how has your taste in romance evolved over the years? So my taste in romance has definitely evolved to be more like taboo and spicy. I for sure read a lot more dark romance books than I ever did way back when. Whereas in the beginning of my romance journey, when I was reading a lot more young adult romance, my taste was more towards the fluffier romances, but they have swung into a completely different direction where I read a lot more dark romance. So for me, dark romance is where it's at, as well as more spicier romances. Those are the romance books that I do seek out a lot more than the fluffier ones. Question number 7 is, what is the most powerful romance that you have read that left a lasting impact? As for a young adult romance that has left a huge impact on me, that has to go to Kyo and Toru from Fruits Basket. They are like the standard when it comes to romance. I compare every single romance that I read about to them because they are at the tippy top of the best romance that I have ever read. So I just feel like nothing will compare to them. Their whole love story has left an infinite lasting impact on me. It has touched me so much. They are just so near and dear to me. And as for adult romance that has left a lasting impact on me, that has to go to Feyre and Rhysand from specifically A Court of Mist and Fury. They are one of the most memorable romances that I have ever read. Each and every one of their scenes together are so memorable and they were so impactful, and I just love the love that these two have for each other. So they are definitely one romance that I will always remember. Question number 8 is, what was the romance book that told you this is what I'm looking for in my personal life and or partner? And that is also another great question. There are so many great bookish men out there that I could apply this to, but I feel like the ultimate book boyfriend for me, who I would just love to have as a partner, is Kyo from Fruits Basket. It's the most obvious choice for me. I will forever be so in love with Kyo. I just love everything about him, and the way that he approaches relationships is something that I feel like so many girls would want. He is so attentive. He is a great listener. He is very physically affectionate, which is something that I do look for in like romantic relationships. I love physical affection. It's something that makes me feel like really loved and valued. He is very brooding. He can come off a little aggressive, but he doesn't mean to. Inside, he has the sweetest heart ever. I wish he was real, but at the same time, he already has Toru, and he would never pick anyone else over Toru, so I wouldn't stand a chance. But I could dream, huh? Question number 9 is, which romance books would you recommend to a romance newbie and a seasoned romance reader? So for a newbie, if you are just wanting to get into romance, I'm going to recommend an author, and that is Colleen Hoover. I think she is a great gateway author into the romance genre, specifically the adult romance genre. The reason being is that I feel like when you are first starting off with romance, I wouldn't recommend to really venture into the spicy romance genre. Yet it's a little better, I think, to ease into that, and a lot of Colleen Hoover books just have minimal spice in them. With the exception of Ugly Love and Too Late, those two books definitely have a lot of spice in them, but all the rest of her books, at least the ones that I have read so far, really only have minimal spice in them, if at all. As well as for reason number 2, her books are so gripping, you cannot put them down. She writes in a way that is so addicting that you could basically finish them in one sitting. And for a seasoned romance reader, we're going to go in the opposite direction. I feel like a lot more seasoned romance readers read books with a lot of spice in them. So I'm going to recommend some of the most spiciest books that I have ever read. The first one is Lights Out by Nevessa Allen, which I mentioned earlier. This book has so much spice in it, and all the spicy scenes are so freaking good, so that is one. I also would recommend the Off Campus series by Elle Kennedy. This is a great series that has a lot of spice in it, also a lot of humor, and just really great characters. I would also recommend the Twisted series by Anna Huang, which is a series that I read recently, like 2 months ago, and I really loved it. So many great spicy scenes in this one. They are like up there with the heat factor. They are so good. And lastly, I would recommend Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas. This is a taboo romance with so much steam in it, so much angst, so much forbiddenness. It is also an age gap romance, just so many good things, so many good tropes in this one. I loved it. And question number 10 is, in your eyes, what are 3 perfect romances? So as for 3 perfect young adult romances, of course, again, I have to mention Kyo and Toru from Fruits Basket. Every single moment of their romance journey is absolutely perfect. Like I said earlier, they are the standard. I compare every single romance that I read to them. No other romance will beat them. They are just absolutely perfection. I also have to mention Mallory and Ryder from The Problem with Forever by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is one of my favorite novels of all time, and the romance in this book meant so much to me. It is a childhood friends to lovers romance that was just so gripping and so perfect from beginning to end. I am dying to reread this book right now because it was so freaking good. I think I've read it twice now, and I need to read it for a 3rd time because I love the romance in this book. It was so freaking sweet. And I also have to mention a romance from a book that I read just recently, and that is Kale and Samantha from A Thousand Broken Pieces by Tilly Cole. I loved how supportive and loving this romance was. These 2 characters deal with a lot of grief in their individual journeys, and so they are really there for each other. They're each other's support, and it was so beautiful to see. They just cared for each other so much. And overall, this romance was so freaking romantic. It was perfect. And as for 3 perfect adult romances, I have to mention Josh and Jules from Twisted Hate from the Twisted series. This one follows the enemies to lovers trope, and I feel like this book does that trope perfectly. I feel like with a lot of enemies to lovers romances, sometimes the enemies part ends too quickly and just goes right into the lovers part, and I prefer for the enemies part to be stretched out for a while, and this book does that, so I really appreciated that. And even after these 2 fall in love with each other, they still have that bickering relationship that they had while they were enemies. So the nature of the relationship never really changed. It just grew to be a lot more loving. So this was overall a perfect enemies to lovers romance. I love these 2. I also got to mention Feyre and Rhysand from A Court of Mist and Fury. Like I mentioned earlier, every single scene between these 2 was absolute perfection. Some of the most romantic scenes I have ever read. I love these 2. too. And lastly, I have Josh and Allie from Lights Out. These two were hilarious and adorable, but they also had so much spicy chemistry. They were just a really unique blend of cuteness as well as naughtiness that I absolutely loved. And with that, that was all of the questions. I hope this tag gave you more insight into who I am as a romance reader. Romance will forever be my favorite genre when it comes to books. I love reading about romantic relationships. I love reading about relationships in general, like not just romantic, but like family relationships, friendships. I just love reading about relationships in general. Like they are the most interesting things for me personally to read about. I will link the original creator to this tag in the description box, as well as the questions if you guys would like to answer these questions in the comment section of this video. I would love to read them. Or if you would like to do a video on this tag yourself, I will leave all the information and questions down in the description box below. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you had a fantastic Valentine's Day. I will be back next week with a new video, so hopefully I will see you then. Bye!